The pre-dawn darkness of Manhattan pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse on Park Avenue, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk where Khalid al-Rashid sat motionless. His fingers trembled as they hovered over the bankruptcy documents spread before him, papers that would dismantle everything he'd built over 30 years. The Saudi billionaire's empire, once valued at $2 billion, had crumbled in just 18 months. Real estate holdings, tech investments, shipping companies, all gone, dissolved like sugar in water. Outside, the city that never slept hummed with its usual indifference. Yellow cabs honked their way through early morning traffic. Steam rose from subway grates. Life continued, oblivious to the catastrophic collapse happening 47 floors above street level. Khalid's hand shook as he reached for the gold Mont Blanc pen his father had given him when he'd made his first million. The irony wasn't lost on him. His father had warned him about American business partners, about trusting the wrong people, but Khalid had been certain, so confident in his judgment, so sure that his business acumen would protect him. He'd been a fool. The bankruptcy lawyer, Richard Morrison, had left the documents 3 hours ago with crisp instructions. Sign by 6 a.m. The creditors' meeting is at 9. Every minute you delay costs you more in penalties. Morrison's words echoed in Khalid's mind like a death sentence. Behind him, in the shadows of the enormous living room, someone moved quietly. Khalid didn't turn. He knew who it was, the only person who'd stayed when everyone else had abandoned him. "Mr. al-Rashid," came the soft, hesitant voice. "I brought you some coffee, sir." Khalid finally looked up. Grace Washington stood there, her dark hands wrapped around a porcelain cup, her eyes filled with concern that seemed too genuine for someone who hadn't been paid in 3 weeks. She was 62 years old, had worked for him for 7 years, and unlike his CFO, his business partners, and even his own brother, she hadn't run when the money dried up. "Thank you, Grace," Khalid managed, his accent thick with exhaustion. "But I don't think coffee will help what's coming." Grace set the cup down on the desk, her movements careful, almost reverential. She'd watched this man build his American dream, had seen him donate millions to children's hospitals, had witnessed his kindness to employees most billionaires would never notice. And now she watched him break. "Sir, if you don't mind my asking." Grace hesitated, wringing her hands in her apron. "What happened? How did it all fall apart so fast?" Khalid laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in the vast room. "Bad investments, they said, market downturns, failed ventures. My CFO, Thomas Hendricks, showed me the numbers every month, each report worse than the last. He recommended selling assets, cutting losses, restructuring." He gestured at the papers. "Until there was nothing left to restructure." He picked up one of the documents, his eyes scanning words he'd read 100 times. "Hendricks disappeared 2 weeks ago, left a resignation letter and vanished. My lawyers can't find him. My accountants say everything was by the book, but somehow, Grace, I lost everything and I still don't understand how. If you found yourself wondering what really happened to Khalid's fortune, subscribe to our channel now. Hit that notification bell because this story takes turns you won't believe, and you won't want to miss what Grace discovers next." Grace moved closer, her eyes drawn to the papers scattered across the desk. She'd cleaned this office every day for 7 years, had dusted these same documents, organized these same files. Something about the scene felt wrong, though she couldn't quite articulate what. "Mr. al-Rashid," she said slowly, "may I look at something?" Khalid waved his hand dismissively. "Look at whatever you want, Grace. In 3 hours, it'll all belong to the bankruptcy court anyway." Grace picked up a folder marked Quarterly Reports, Hendricks Financial Analysis. Her reading wasn't perfect. She'd dropped out of school at 16 to help her mother, but she'd learned enough over the years, especially watching Khalid work. She opened the folder, her finger tracing the lines of numbers. Something caught her eye immediately. A small thing, so small that anyone moving quickly would miss it. But Grace Washington had spent her entire life paying attention to details. When you clean for the wealthy, you learn that small details matter. A misplaced photograph means an affair. A hidden receipt means a secret. A tiny inconsistency means someone's lying. "Sir," Grace said, her voice suddenly sharp with urgency. "These dates, they're wrong." Khalid looked up, exhaustion making his eyes heavy. "What do you mean?" Grace pointed to a line in the report, her finger shaking slightly. "This report is dated March 15th, 2024. But look here, there's a reference to a property sale on March 22nd, 2024. How can a report mention something that happened a week after it was written?" The room fell silent. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of gray and amber. Khalid stood slowly, moving around the desk to look at what Grace was showing him. His eyes widened. She was right. The report referenced a transaction that hadn't occurred yet when the report was supposedly written, which meant the report was backdated, Khalid whispered, his mind suddenly racing. He grabbed another folder, then another, spreading them across the desk with renewed energy. Grace, help me. Look for more date inconsistencies. Anything that doesn't match. For the next 20 minutes they worked together, the billionaire and his maid, bent over documents in the growing light of dawn. And with each paper they examined, the pattern became clearer. References to events that hadn't happened yet. Stock prices that didn't match the dates. Meeting notes referencing conversations that occurred weeks after the reports were filed. My God, Khalid breathed. These reports, they're all fabricated. Hendricks didn't just make bad recommendations. He created false documents to justify selling my assets. But why? Where did the money go? Grace picked up another paper, this one a wire transfer authorization. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the account number at the bottom. Mr. Al-Rashid, do you recognize this account? Khalid looked. His blood ran cold. The account number was familiar, very familiar. It belonged to a holding company he'd set up years ago for charitable donations. But according to this transfer, $340 million had been moved into it, and then immediately transferred out to an offshore account. This is impossible, Khalid said, his voice shaking. I never authorized this. I would have seen it. I would have. He stopped mid-sentence, his face going pale. What is it, sir? Grace asked. Khalid grabbed his laptop, his fingers flying over the keyboard despite their trembling. He pulled up his banking access, typing in passwords with growing desperation. When the screen loaded, he stared at it in disbelief. Someone's been accessing my accounts remotely, he said. Look, login attempts from IP addresses in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Singapore. Someone had my credentials, Grace. Someone's been systematically draining my accounts and covering their tracks with fake reports. The dawn light was stronger now, flooding the penthouse with golden illumination, but Khalid barely noticed. His mind was reeling with the implications. Who? Grace asked softly. Who would do this to you? Before Khalid could answer, his phone buzzed on the desk. A text message from an unknown number. He opened it and the blood drained from his face. The message read, Sign the papers, Khalid. It's too late to stop this. You have 30 minutes. Grace saw his expression and felt a chill run down her spine. Mr. Al-Rashid? Khalid looked at her, and in his eyes was something she'd never seen before. Not despair, but fury. Pure, crystallized rage. Grace, he said quietly. How good is your memory? Pretty good, sir. Why? Because we have 29 minutes to figure out who's been destroying me, and I think you just saved my life. Grace Washington had learned long ago that powerful men didn't ask for help from their maids unless they were truly desperate. But as she watched Khalid al-Rashid's fingers fly across his laptop keyboard, pulling up documents and transaction records with frantic energy, she realized this was something different. This wasn't desperation. This was a man who just found a reason to fight back. Grace, you said you have a good memory, Khalid said, not looking up from the screen. Think back. 7 years you've worked here. Have you ever seen Thomas Hendricks acting strangely? Meeting with anyone unusual? Making phone calls he didn't want me to hear? Grace closed her eyes, reaching back through years of cleaning, organizing, serving coffee during endless business meetings. Hendricks had been Khalid's CFO for 12 years, 5 years before she'd even started working here. He'd always been polite to her, almost too polite, the way some wealthy people are polite to service workers. Pleasant but distant, acknowledging her existence without really seeing her. But there was something, a memory, faint but persistent. Sir, Grace said slowly, about 6 months ago, maybe 7, I was cleaning your conference room late one evening. You were in Dubai for that real estate deal. Mr. Hendricks was here with another man. I didn't recognize him. He wasn't one of your regular business associates. Khalid's fingers stopped moving. What did this man look like? Older, maybe 60. White hair, very expensive suit. British accent, I think. They were arguing about something. When I came in to empty the trash, they stopped talking immediately. Mr. Hendricks looked nervous, guilty almost. Did you hear anything they said? Anything at all? Grace wrinkled her forehead, concentrating. Just one thing. The British man said something like, the timeline needs to accelerate, he's getting suspicious. And Mr. Hendricks said, "I need more time. If we move too fast, he'll notice the discrepancies." The room fell silent except for the hum of the laptop and the distant sounds of Manhattan waking up outside. Khalid's jaw clenched as he processed this information. British, older, expensive suit. Khalid pulled up a folder on his computer, clicking through photographs from various business events. Was it any of these men? Grace leaned forward, studying each photo carefully. Corporate dinners, charity galas, investment conferences. Dozens of faces all blending together in a sea of privilege and power. Then she stopped. "Him," she said, pointing at a photograph from a charity gala 18 months ago. "That's him, I'm certain." Khalid stared at the image. The man in question stood slightly apart from the main group, a champagne flute in his hand, his silver hair perfectly styled. His name tag was visible in the high-resolution photo. Sir Malcolm Pemberton, Pemberton Global Investments. Malcolm Pemberton, Khalid whispered, and something dark crossed his face. Of course, it was always him. "You know him?" Grace asked. Khalid stood abruptly, pacing to the windows. The sun was rising over Manhattan now, painting the city in shades of orange and gold. But the beauty of the moment was lost on him. His mind was elsewhere, traveling back through years of business dealings, partnerships, and what he'd thought was friendship. "Malcolm Pemberton and I were competitors for 20 years, Khalid explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. "We bid on the same properties, invested in the same sectors, moved in the same circles. 3 years ago, I beat him on a massive development deal in Los Angeles, a $800 million project that he'd been pursuing for years. He was gracious about it, too gracious. He invited me to dinner, congratulated me, even introduced me to some of his business contacts." Grace felt her stomach tighten. She'd heard enough stories in her 62 years to know where this was going. "One of those contacts was Thomas Hendricks," Khalid continued. "Malcolm vouched for him personally, said Hendricks was the best CFO in the business, that he'd turned around 3 struggling companies. I was impressed. My previous CFO had just retired, and I needed someone with Hendricks' expertise. Malcolm practically gift-wrapped him for me. And you hired him?" Grace said softly. "I hired him. 12 years ago." Khalid turned from the window, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "Malcolm Pemberton spent 12 years positioning his spy in my organization. 12 years waiting for the right moment to strike. And 18 months ago, he activated him." Khalid moved back to his desk, pulling up more files with renewed purpose. "Look at this, Grace. 18 months ago, right when my financial troubles began, Pemberton Global Investments started acquiring properties in every market where I was selling. They bought my Los Angeles development, the one I'd won from Malcolm, for 40 cents on the dollar. They purchased my shipping company through a shell corporation. They even acquired my tech investments through a series of intermediary buyers." Grace watched the numbers scroll across the screen. Even with her limited financial knowledge, the pattern was clear. Every asset Khalid had been forced to sell had somehow ended up in Malcolm Pemberton's portfolio. "He didn't just want to beat you," Grace said. "He wanted to destroy you and take everything you'd built." "Exactly." Khalid's phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. 20 minutes, Khalid. Sign the papers." But this time, Khalid smiled. A cold, dangerous expression that Grace had never seen on his face before. He picked up his phone and typed a response. "I know what you did, Malcolm. I know everything." The response came within seconds. "You know nothing, and you have no proof. Sign the papers." Khalid showed the text to Grace. "He's right. We know what happened, but we can't prove it. The documents Hendricks created are expertly forged. The transactions are buried in layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. Even if I went to the authorities right now, it would take months or years to unravel the fraud. And by then, the bankruptcy proceedings would be complete." Grace felt despair creeping back into the room. They'd discovered the truth, but truth without proof was just a story, and stories didn't hold up in bankruptcy court. But then Grace remembered something else, another small detail, the kind she'd trained herself to notice over a lifetime of careful observation. "Mr. Al-Rashid," she said, "that night I saw Mr. Hendricks with Pemberton. They had papers spread out on the conference table. I remember because one of them fell on the floor when I came in. Mr. Hendricks was very quick to pick it up, but not before I saw it. What was on it? Numbers, account numbers, I think, and a logo, something with a palm tree and a star. I remember thinking it looked like a resort logo." Khalid's eyes widened. "The Cayman Islands Banking Authority." Their logo is a palm tree and star. He grabbed Grace's hands, his excitement barely contained. Grace, this is important. Where exactly did this paper fall? By the third chair on the left side of the conference table. Mr. Hendricks picked it up, but he was flustered. He might have missed something. Without another word, Khalid strode out of his office, Grace hurrying behind him. They entered the conference room, its long mahogany table gleaming in the morning light. Khalid went straight to the third chair on the left, dropping to his knees and examining the floor. "What are you looking for?" Grace asked. "Hendricks was nervous, you said. Flustered. When people are flustered, they make mistakes." Khalid's hand swept under the edge of the chair, feeling along the underside of the seat. They dropped things. His fingers encountered something. Paper, wedged between the seat cushion and the chair frame. With careful precision, he extracted a folded piece of paper, yellowed slightly with age. Grace watched as Khalid unfolded it with trembling hands. It was a photocopy of a document, a wire transfer authorization from one of Khalid's accounts to a Cayman Islands bank. But more importantly, it bore two signatures, Thomas Hendricks and Malcolm Pemberton. "This is it," Khalid breathed. "This is the proof. Hendricks must have dropped it that night and couldn't find it in his panic." "Grace, do you understand what this means?" Grace did understand. This single piece of paper connected Malcolm Pemberton directly to the fraudulent transfers. It showed conspiracy, premeditation, and fraud on a massive scale. Khalid's phone buzzed again. 15 minutes. Last chance, Khalid. But Khalid was already dialing a different number. "Richard? Richard Morrison? Yes, I know it's early. Listen to me very carefully. Do not submit those bankruptcy papers. I don't care what the creditors say. I need you in my office right now with a criminal fraud attorney. Yes, criminal. Because I'm about to hand you evidence of the biggest financial fraud case you've ever seen." He hung up and turned to Grace, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw tears in his eyes. "You saved me," he said simply. "Grace, you saved everything." Grace felt her own eyes filling with tears. "I just noticed a few small things, sir. That's all." "No," Khalid said firmly. "You saw what everyone else missed. My lawyers, my accountants, my business partners, they all looked at the big picture and missed the details. But you saw the truth because you pay attention, because you care." Outside the windows, Manhattan was fully awake now. The city sparkled in the morning sun, full of promise and possibility. But inside the penthouse, a different kind of awakening was occurring. Khalid's phone rang. Not a text this time, but an actual call from the unknown number. He answered, putting it on speaker. "Khalid," came Malcolm Pemberton's cultured British voice, no longer hiding behind anonymity. "I assume you received my messages. Sign the papers. This is your last—" "I found the wire transfer authorization, Malcolm," Khalid interrupted, his voice ice cold. "The one with your signature next to Hendricks. The one that proves you've been orchestrating this fraud for 18 months. My lawyers are on their way. The FBI will be my next call." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, "You're bluffing. Hendricks would never be so careless. He dropped it 6 months ago during a meeting in my conference room. My maid found it wedged under a chair. The same maid who saw you two together, who heard you discuss accelerating the timeline. The same maid who's going to testify to everything she witnessed." Another long silence. Grace could hear Malcolm's breathing, shallow and rapid, the sound of a man watching his perfect plan disintegrate. "This isn't over," Malcolm finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No, it's not," Khalid agreed. "But it's over for you. I'm going to recover every penny you stole, Malcolm. And then I'm going to make sure you spend the next 20 years in a federal prison thinking about what it cost you to let revenge consume you." He ended the call and looked at Grace, who stood there in her simple uniform, her hands clasped in front of her, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Sir," she whispered. "What happens now?" Khalid smiled. A genuine smile this time, full of warmth and gratitude. Now we fight back. And Grace, you're not my maid anymore. As of this moment, you're my special consultant on a salary of $200,000 a year. Because anyone who can save a $4 $2 billion empire is worth far more than that." The conference room of Morrison & Associates had never seen anything quite like the scene unfolding at 7:30 that Monday morning. Richard Morrison, senior bankruptcy attorney, sat at the head of the table with his mouth slightly open, staring at the photocopy Grace had found as if it were a winning lottery ticket. Beside him, Jennifer Chen, the criminal fraud attorney he'd dragged out of bed, examined the document with intense scrutiny, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Grace sat quietly in the corner, still processing what had happened in the last 3 hours. One moment she'd been serving coffee to a man about to lose everything. The next, she'd become the key witness in what Jennifer Chen kept calling the financial crime of the decade. Her hands were still shaking slightly, though whether from exhaustion, fear, or adrenaline, she couldn't quite tell. Khalid stood by the windows, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Arabic to someone in Riyadh. Grace had learned enough over the years to catch a few words: lawyers, fraud, Pemberton, and what sounded like several very creative curses. His brother, she assumed, or perhaps his business partners back in Saudi Arabia, who distanced themselves when the money troubles began. "This is extraordinary," Jennifer Chen said, finally looking up from the document. "Mr. Al-Rashid, do you understand what you have here? This isn't just evidence of fraud. This is evidence of conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and probably half a dozen other federal crimes. If we can authenticate this signature as Malcolm Pemberton's, we're looking at a case that could result in 20 to 30 years in federal prison. Can you authenticate it?" Khalid asked, ending his call and turning to face the table. "I have a handwriting expert on retainer who owes me a favor. I can have her here by noon. But honestly, we don't even need to wait for that. We can request Pemberton's signature samples from public documents, business filings, contracts, court records. The man's been in business for 40 years. His signature is everywhere." Richard Morrison cleared his throat. "We need to talk about timing. The creditors' meeting is in 90 minutes. The bankruptcy court expects those signed papers on file by 9 a.m. If we don't deliver, there will be penalties, possibly sanctions. We need to file for an emergency stay immediately." "Do it," Khalid said without hesitation. "File whatever you need to file. Tell them we've discovered evidence of criminal fraud and need time to investigate. Tell them the bankruptcy itself was engineered through illegal means. They're going to want proof," Morrison warned. "Then show them the document. Show them the timeline discrepancies in Hendricks' reports. Grace found those too. Dates that don't match. References to events that hadn't happened yet. If Hendricks was backdating reports to justify asset sales, that's fraud. Clear and obvious fraud." Jennifer Chen nodded, making rapid notes on her legal pad. "We'll need Grace's testimony documented immediately. Everything she saw, heard, and found needs to be in a formal deposition before anyone can claim we're manufacturing evidence. Grace, are you willing to do that?" Grace looked up, suddenly aware that everyone was staring at her. For 62 years, she'd lived a life of careful invisibility. She'd cleaned homes, served food, organized closets, and raised 3 children on wages that barely covered rent. She'd learned early that the best way to survive in a world that didn't see her was to not make waves, to not draw attention, to simply do her job and go home. But now, Khalid al-Rashid was looking at her not as his maid, but as his savior. Jennifer Chen was looking at her as the star witness in a federal fraud case. Richard Morrison was looking at her as the person who could prevent a catastrophic bankruptcy. And somewhere out there, Malcolm Pemberton was probably looking for her too, though for very different reasons. "I'll do whatever you need," Grace said quietly. "Mr. Al-Rashid has been good to me. When my daughter got sick last year and needed surgery, he paid for everything without me even asking. When my grandson needed help with college tuition, Mr. Al-Rashid wrote the check himself. I'm not going to let someone destroy a good man just because they wanted revenge." Khalid's expression softened. "Grace, I'd forgotten about that. You never even mentioned your grandson's tuition. You were dealing with your own troubles by then, sir. I didn't want to burden you, and yet you kept coming to work, even when I couldn't pay you." Grace shrugged. "Where else was I going to go? Besides, someone needed to make sure you ate something and didn't just survive on coffee and stress." Jennifer Chen smiled, but there was steel in her voice when she spoke. "Grace, I need you to understand something. Once we go public with this, your life is going to change. Malcolm Pemberton is one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in international finance. He has resources, connections, and absolutely no scruples. He'll try to intimidate you, discredit you, maybe even threaten you. Are you prepared for that?" Grace thought about her small apartment in Queens, the one she'd lived in for 23 years. She thought about her church community, her daughter and grandchildren, her quiet life of routine and modest pleasures. Malcolm Pemberton could make all of that very difficult. But then she thought about Khalid, sitting alone in his office at dawn, about to sign away his entire life's work because of lies and fabricated documents. She thought about all the people who would lose their jobs when his companies were liquidated. She thought about the hospitals and schools and charities that depended on his donations. "I'm prepared," Grace said firmly. "My grandmother used to tell me, 'Grace, the Lord didn't give you eyes to see and stay silent.' I saw the truth. I'm not going to stay silent." Khalid crossed the room and took Grace's hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "I will never forget this." The moment was interrupted by the conference room door bursting open. A young associate rushed in, her face pale with urgency. "Mr. Morrison, Ms. Chen, you need to see this. It's all over the financial news." She grabbed the remote and turned on the wall-mounted television. CNBC was showing a breaking news banner. "Billionaire Khalid al-Rashid files emergency stay in bankruptcy case. Alleges criminal fraud." The news anchor's voice filled the room. "In a stunning development this morning, Saudi billionaire Khalid al-Rashid has requested an emergency stay in his bankruptcy proceedings, claiming his financial collapse was engineered through criminal fraud by parties yet to be named. Sources close to the case suggest al-Rashid has obtained evidence linking the fraud to a prominent figure in international finance. The bankruptcy court has scheduled an emergency hearing for 11 a.m. this morning to review the allegations." "How did they get this so fast?" Morrison demanded. Jennifer Chen's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and frowned. "It's a statement from Pemberton Global Investments. They're categorically denying any involvement in al-Rashid's financial troubles and threatening to sue for defamation if al-Rashid publicly names them." "They're running scared," Khalid said with satisfaction. "Good, let them be scared for once." But Grace felt a chill run down her spine. Malcolm Pemberton was threatening lawsuits before he'd even been officially accused, which meant he knew they had evidence, which meant someone had warned him. "Sir," Grace said urgently, "how many people knew we found that document?" Khalid's eyes widened as he understood her implication. "Just us. You, me, Morrison, and Chen. We didn't tell anyone else. The associate who filed the emergency stay didn't see the actual evidence, just the request itself." "Then how does Pemberton know?" Grace asked. "How does he know to issue a denial and threaten defamation suits unless someone told him exactly what we found?" The room fell silent. Jennifer Chen slowly removed her glasses, her expression hardening. "We have a leak. Someone in this office, or someone with access to this office, is feeding information to Pemberton." Morrison's face went red with anger. "That's impossible. Everyone in this firm has been with me for years. They're all vetted, all trusted. Then maybe the leak isn't from your firm," Grace interrupted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Mr. al-Rashid, how many people have you called since we found the document?" Khalid thought back. "My brother in Riyadh, my attorney there, He stopped, his face going pale. "My head of security. I called him to arrange protection for my properties." "Who is your head of security?" Jennifer Chen asked sharply. "Marcus Webb. He's been with me for 8 years. Former Secret Service. Impeccable credentials." But even as Khalid said it, doubt crept into his voice. "Hendricks recommended him, and did. Hendricks said he'd worked with Webb before, that he was the best in the business." Grace and Khalid locked eyes across the conference room, the same terrible realization dawning on both of them. "Hendricks recommended him," Grace whispered. "Just like Pemberton recommended Hendricks." Khalid grabbed his phone and pulled up his recent calls. Sure enough, there was the call to Marcus Webb at 7:02 a.m., 28 minutes before the CNBC News alert went live. Plenty of time for Webb to contact Pemberton and warn him. "They didn't just plant Hendricks," Jennifer Chen said grimly. "They planted your head of security too. They've had eyes and ears on you for nearly a decade, Khalid. Every business decision, every financial move, every private conversation, Pemberton knew it all." The weight of the betrayal settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Khalid had trusted these men with everything, his finances, his safety, his secrets, and they'd sold him out for Malcolm Pemberton's revenge. "We need to assume everything is compromised," Jennifer Chen said, moving into crisis management mode. "Morrison, clear this conference room. No associates, no paralegals, no one but us. Grace, I need you to write down everything you remember, every date, every conversation, every detail. And Khalid, you need to fire Marcus Webb right now and hire new security. People Pemberton doesn't know about." But before anyone could move, Grace's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, frowning. She rarely got text messages. Her daughter usually just called. But this was from an unknown number. The message was simple and chilling. "Tell Khalid to sign the papers and make this go away. Your grandson Terrence starts his sophomore year at Columbia next month. Would be a shame if something happened to his scholarship. Or to him." Grace's hands began to shake so violently she nearly dropped the phone. Khalid saw her expression and was at her side instantly. "Grace? What is it?" She showed him the message. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "They're threatening my grandson," Grace whispered. "They're threatening Terrence." Khalid's face transformed into something Grace had never seen before. Pure, cold fury. "Jennifer, get the FBI on the phone right now. Not later, not this afternoon, right now. This just became a federal case with interstate communication threats. Morrison, file for immediate protective custody for Grace and her family. I don't care what it costs." "Sir, I can't ask you to," Grace began. "You're not asking," Khalid interrupted firmly. "Grace, you put yourself in danger to save me. Now I'm going to make sure you and your family are protected. Malcolm Pemberton wants to play dirty? Fine. But he just made his biggest mistake. He threatened someone I care about. And I'm going to make sure he pays for every single crime he's committed." Jennifer Chen was already dialing, her voice sharp and authoritative as she spoke to whoever answered. "This is Jennifer Chen, criminal defense attorney. I need to speak to someone in the Financial Crimes Division immediately. We have evidence of a multi-million-dollar fraud case with witness intimidation occurring in real time." "Yes, I'll hold." Grace sat down heavily, her mind spinning. This morning she'd been worried about making coffee and organizing files. Now she was in the middle of a criminal conspiracy with federal implications, and someone was threatening her grandson. Khalid knelt beside her chair, his voice gentle despite the storm raging in his eyes. "Grace, I promise you, Terrence will be safe. Your daughter will be safe. You will be safe. I have resources Pemberton doesn't know about, connections he can't touch. Trust me." Grace looked into his eyes and saw the same determination she'd seen when he'd first started building his empire, the same fierce will that had taken a young man from Riyadh and turned him into a billionaire. And she realized something. Malcolm Pemberton had made a critical error. He'd assumed that destroying Khalid's finances would destroy his spirit, but what Pemberton didn't understand was that Khalid al-Rashid hadn't built his empire on money alone. He'd built it on loyalty, on honor, on the kind of values that made him pay for a maid's daughter's surgery without being asked. And those values couldn't be stolen, frozen, or liquidated. "I trust you," Grace said quietly. The FBI field office in Lower Manhattan was a fortress of gray concrete and reinforced glass, designed to intimidate as much as protect. Grace Washington had never imagined she'd walk through its doors, much less as the star witness in a federal fraud investigation. Yet here she was at 10:15 a.m., flanked by 2 federal agents and accompanied by Khalid, Jennifer Chen, and a security detail that had materialized seemingly out of nowhere in the past 2 hours. Special Agent Dana Reeves was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that came from spending 20 years prosecuting white-collar criminals. She sat across from Grace in interview room 3, a recording device between them, and reviewed the photocopy of the wire transfer authorization with the kind of intensity usually reserved for ancient religious texts. "Mrs. Washington," Agent Reeves began, her voice professional but not unkind. "I need you to walk me through exactly how you found this document. Every detail matters. Start from the beginning." Grace took a deep breath and began to speak. She described the pre-dawn scene in Khalid's office, the bankruptcy papers spread across his desk, the trembling in his hands. She explained how she'd noticed the date discrepancies in Hendrix's reports, small inconsistencies that anyone moving quickly would miss. She recounted the memory of seeing Hendrix with the British man 6 months ago, their hushed conversation, the paper that had fallen to the floor. Agent Reeves listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. Behind the two-way mirror, Grace knew other agents were watching, analyzing, evaluating whether she was credible or just a loyal employee trying to save her employer. "This British man you saw with Thomas Hendrix," Agent Reeves said when Grace finished. "You identified him as Malcolm Pemberton from a photograph. How certain are you of this identification?" 100% certain, Grace replied firmly. "I've been cleaning offices and serving at events for 40 years, Agent Reeves. You learn to pay attention to faces, to remember who's who. It's part of survival in my line of work. That was definitely Malcolm Pemberton. And you heard him say, 'The timeline needs to accelerate, he's getting suspicious.' Those exact words? Yes, ma'am. And Mr. Hendrix responded that he needed more time, that if they moved too fast, Mr. al-Rashid would notice the discrepancies." Agent Reeves leaned back in her chair, studying Grace with an expression that was impossible to read. "Mrs. Washington, do you understand that Malcolm Pemberton is going to come after you? His lawyers will tear apart every aspect of your testimony. They'll question your memory, your motives, your relationship with Mr. Al-Rashid. They'll suggest you're lying to help your employer avoid legitimate debts. Grace met the agent's gaze without flinching. Let them come. I'm telling the truth, and the truth doesn't change just because powerful people don't like it. A small smile crossed Agent Reeves's face. Good answer. She turned off the recording device and stood. Wait here. I need to consult with my team. Grace was left alone in the interview room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the walls bare except for a large mirror that she knew wasn't really a mirror at all. She thought about Terrence, her grandson, probably sitting in a lecture hall at Columbia right now, oblivious to the fact that his grandmother was in an FBI office and that someone had threatened him. Jennifer Chen had assured her that campus security had been alerted, that plainclothes officers were keeping an eye on him, but Grace still felt her chest tighten with worry. The door opened and Khalid entered, followed by Agent Reeves and another man Grace didn't recognize. He was tall, African-American, with gray at his temples and the bearing of someone who'd spent time in the military. Grace, Khalid said, this is Special Agent Marcus Winters. He's with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and he's been investigating Malcolm Pemberton for 2 years. Grace's eyes widened. 2 years? Agent Winters nodded, taking a seat across from her. Pemberton has been on our radar for a long time, Mrs. Washington. We've suspected him of orchestrating similar schemes against at least 4 other business rivals over the past decade. But he's careful, very careful. We've never been able to gather enough evidence to bring charges. Until now. He opened a tablet and turned it toward Grace. On the screen were photographs of 4 men, all wealthy, all businessmen, all with the same haunted look in their eyes that Grace had seen in Khalid's face just hours ago. David Chen, real estate developer, filed for bankruptcy 3 years ago, Agent Winters explained, pointing to each photo in turn. Michael Rodriguez, tech entrepreneur, lost his company to hostile takeover 2 years ago. James O'Connor, shipping magnate, declared bankruptcy 18 months ago. And Robert Yamamoto, investment banker, committed suicide last year after his firm collapsed. Grace felt sick. Pemberton did this to all of them? We believe so. Each case followed the same pattern. A trusted CFO or financial advisor, gradual asset depletion disguised as bad investments, fabricated reports, offshore accounts. But we could never prove the connection to Pemberton. The CFOs would disappear, the paper trails would go cold, and Pemberton would somehow end up acquiring the assets at bargain prices through shell companies. Thomas Hendricks, Grace said suddenly. Was he involved in any of those other cases? Agent Winters pulled up another screen. Not under that name. But look at this. He showed her a series of photographs. The same man with different hairstyles, different glasses, different names. Thomas Hendricks has operated under at least 6 different identities over the past 15 years. Real name, Timothy Halloran, former accountant who lost his license for fraud in 2008. Pemberton has been using him as his inside man for years. Khalid slammed his fist on the table, making everyone jump. All this time you knew Pemberton was doing this, and you did nothing? Robert Yamamoto is dead because you couldn't build your case fast enough. Agent Winters' expression remained calm, but Grace could see the tension in his jaw. Mr. Al-Rashid, I understand your anger, but investigating sophisticated financial fraud takes time. We need ironclad evidence, witnesses who will testify, paper trails that can't be disputed. Pemberton's lawyers are the best money can buy. If we'd moved too soon, he would have walked, and then he'd have been even more careful. So you waited for another victim? Khalid's voice was bitter. No, Agent Reeves interjected. We waited for a victim who would fight back. Someone with the resources and the will to challenge Pemberton in court. Someone like you, Mr. Al-Rashid. She paused. And we waited for a witness like Mrs. Washington. Someone with no financial incentive to lie. Someone with credibility. Someone who noticed what trained forensic accountants missed. Grace felt the weight of those words settle over her. She wasn't just helping Khalid anymore. She was helping bring down a serial predator who'd destroyed lives and gotten away with it for years. What do you need from me? She asked quietly. Agent Winters smiled. Everything you've already given us, Mrs. Washington. Your testimony about seeing Pemberton with Hendricks. The document you found. The date discrepancies you noticed. And most importantly, your willingness to testify in federal court when the time comes. About that threat I received, Grace said, pulling out her phone. The text message about my grandson. Can you trace it? Agent Reeves took the phone and examined the message. We'll try. But these kinds of threats usually come from burner phones or spoofed numbers. What we can do is use this as evidence of witness intimidation. That's a federal crime in itself, and it shows consciousness of guilt. Pemberton wouldn't be threatening you if he didn't think you were a real danger to him. The door burst open and Jennifer Chen rushed in, her face flushed with excitement. We got him. The handwriting expert just confirmed it. The signature on that wire transfer authorization is definitely Malcolm Pemberton's. It matches samples from 50 different business documents. There's no way his lawyers can dispute it. Agent Winters and Agent Reeves exchanged glances. That's all we need for an arrest warrant, Winters said, standing abruptly. Reeves, call the U.S. attorney. Tell them we're moving on Pemberton today. And put out a bolo for Timothy Halloran, a.k.a. Thomas Hendricks. I want him in custody before he can run to a country without extradition. The room exploded into coordinated chaos. Agents were making calls, typing on laptops, coordinating with other departments. Grace sat in the middle of it all, watching her quiet life transform into something she'd never imagined. Khalid sat down beside her, his earlier anger replaced by something softer. Grace, how are you holding up? I'm scared, she admitted. Scared for Terrence, scared for my daughter, scared about what happens next. But I'm also, I don't know, proud maybe. I spent 62 years being invisible, and now, for the first time, people are actually listening to me, actually seeing me. I've always seen you, Grace, Khalid said gently. But you're right. The world is finally catching up. Agent Reeves approached them holding a bulletproof vest. Mrs. Washington, we're going to move you and your family to a safe location while we execute the arrest warrant. It's just a precaution, but Pemberton has resources and we don't know how he'll react when he realizes we're coming for him. Grace stood, accepting the vest with shaking hands. What about Mr. Al-Rashid? We've arranged protection for him as well, and we're freezing Pemberton's assets as we speak. All of them, including the properties he acquired from Mr. Al-Rashid's portfolio. If our case holds up, and I believe it will, Mr. Al-Rashid will eventually recover most of what was stolen from him. The word eventually hung in the air like a question mark. Grace knew that legal cases could drag on for years, that even with solid evidence, wealthy defendants had ways of delaying justice. But at least now, there was hope. At least now Khalid wouldn't have to sign those bankruptcy papers. Khalid seemed to read her thoughts. However long it takes, I'll rebuild. And Grace, you're going to help me do it. Not as my maid. Never again as my maid. As my partner, my consultant. Someone I trust implicitly. Sir, I don't know anything about running a business empire, Grace protested. You know the most important thing, how to see the truth when everyone else is looking at lies. That's worth more than any MBA. He smiled, and for the first time that day it was genuine and warm. Besides, you already saved my empire once. I'd be a fool not to keep you close. Jennifer Chen's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression darkened. We have a problem. Malcolm Pemberton just boarded his private jet at Teterboro Airport. Flight plan filed for the Cayman Islands, and from there he can disappear to any number of countries without extradition treaties. Agent Winters cursed and grabbed his radio. This is Winters. I need the FAA to ground all private flights out of Teterboro immediately, and get me the New Jersey State Police. We need units at that airport now. But even as he spoke, they could see on Jennifer's phone that the flight status had changed. Pemberton's jet was already taxiing toward the runway. He's running, Grace whispered. He knows we have him, so he's running. Khalid's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his eyes widened. It's Pemberton. He's calling me directly. Agent Reeves nodded sharply. Answer it. Put it on speaker. Let's hear what he has to say. Khalid accepted the call, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. Hello, Malcolm. Malcolm Pemberton's cultured British accent filled the room, but there was an edge to it now. A desperation that hadn't been there before. Khalid, my old friend, I assume you're quite pleased with yourself right now. Friend. Khalid's voice was ice. Is that what you call someone you systematically destroy over 18 months? Someone whose trust you violate? Someone whose life you try to ruin? Pemberton laughed, but it sounded hollow. Oh, come now. This is business, Khalid. You took something from me, that Los Angeles development. So I took everything from you. Surely you understand the principle of reciprocity. The Los Angeles deal was fair competition, Malcolm. I won the bid legitimately. What you did was criminal fraud, and you're going to prison for it. Am I? Pemberton's voice turned mocking. I'm currently sitting in a very comfortable jet about to take off for a very comfortable island where American law enforcement can't touch me. And from there, Well, the world is quite large for someone with my resources. I'll miss New York, but I hear Dubai is lovely this time of year. Perhaps I'll even visit Riyadh. Oh, but that might be awkward, wouldn't it? Grace watched Khalid's face flush with anger, but when he spoke, his voice remained controlled. You're running, Malcolm. You're abandoning everything you built, everyone you know. That's not victory. That's defeat. Better than a federal prison cell, Pemberton shot back. But before I go, I wanted to give you some advice, Khalid. That maid of yours, Grace, is it? She's a clever woman. Too clever. You should be careful about trusting people who notice too much. They can be problematic. The implicit threat was clear. Grace felt her blood run cold. But Khalid smiled. A dangerous expression. Grace is under FBI protection, Malcolm, as is her entire family. And every word you're saying right now is being recorded by federal agents. So please continue threatening witnesses. It'll add another few years to your eventual sentence. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Pemberton spoke again, the mocking tone was gone. You think you've won? You haven't. I have copies of everything. Every transaction, every document, every secret your precious empire is built on. And if I'm going down, Khalid, I'm taking you with me. Agent Winters made frantic hand signals, mouthing words Grace couldn't quite catch. But Khalid understood. What secrets, Malcolm? What exactly do you have? Let's just say that your business practices over the years haven't always been entirely above board. Tax havens, creative accounting, partnerships with individuals of questionable reputation. Sound familiar? I've documented all of it. And if the FBI wants to investigate me, well, I'm happy to share my files on you as well. The FBI interview room fell into a tense silence as Malcolm Pemberton's threat hung in the air like poison gas. Grace watched Khalid's face carefully, searching for any sign that Pemberton's accusations had merit. She'd worked for this man for 7 years, had seen his business dealings up close, had organized his files and cleaned his offices. If there were skeletons in his closet, surely she would have noticed something. But Khalid's expression remained calm, almost amused. He looked at Agent Winters, who nodded encouragingly, and then spoke into the phone with absolute confidence. Malcolm, you're bluffing, and you're doing it badly. Am I? Pemberton's voice crackled with static as his jet continued taxiing. Shall I start listing transactions? The Dubai real estate deal in 2019 that involved a shell company registered in Delaware through my attorney's office, completely legal and documented with the IRS. Khalid interrupted smoothly. Try again. What about your partnership with Viktor Kozlov, the Russian businessman who was later investigated for fraud? Yes, I did business with him in 2017 before any investigations began. And when the first whisper of impropriety emerged, I severed all ties and cooperated fully with authorities. The FBI already has those records, Malcolm. Agent Winters, don't you? Agent Winters nodded, speaking up so the phone could pick up his voice. We do, Mr. Al-Rashid's business practices have been thoroughly vetted. He's made some aggressive but legal deals over the years. Nothing criminal, nothing prosecutable. Grace felt relief wash over her. Whatever else Khalid might be, he wasn't a criminal like Pemberton. But Pemberton wasn't finished. His voice took on a more desperate edge. What about the payments to Councilman Harris in Boston? The ones that mysteriously coincided with zoning approvals for your development project? Khalid's jaw tightened slightly, the first crack in his composure. Grace noticed it immediately, her heart sinking. There was something there, something real. Agent Reeves leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. Mr. Al-Rashid, care to address that allegation? Khalid took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter but still firm. In 2018, I made several donations to Councilman Thomas Harris's re-election campaign. These were legal campaign contributions, properly documented and within all limits set by Massachusetts law. Those donations were made 6 months before I even began pursuing the Boston development project. The timing was coincidental, and the zoning approval I eventually received was based on the project's merits, not on any quid pro quo arrangement. But you can see how it might look questionable, Agent Reeves said carefully. I can, Khalid admitted, which is why I disclosed all of it to my attorneys at the time and made sure every T was crossed and every I was dotted. Pemberton can share those records all he wants. They'll show aggressive business practices, yes, but nothing illegal. Pemberton's laugh crackled through the phone speaker. Perhaps not illegal in the strictest sense, Khalid, but how will it look in the press? Saudi billionaire made suspicious donations before lucrative zoning approval. Even if you're technically innocent, the court of public opinion will destroy what's left of your reputation. And your business partners in Riyadh, how will they feel about these revelations? The royal family frowns on scandal, don't they? Grace saw the strategy clearly now. Pemberton couldn't win in court, so he was going to wage war in the media. He was going to drag Khalid's name through the mud, create enough doubt and controversy that even if Khalid recovered his assets legally, his reputation would be permanently damaged. But then Jennifer Chen stepped forward, her phone in hand, a predatory smile on her face. "Mr. Pemberton, this is Jennifer Chen, Mr. Al-Rashid's attorney. Before you release any documents to the press, you should know that we've just filed a motion to freeze all of your assets worldwide, including your media holdings. Yes, we know you own controlling interests in 3 financial news websites and 2 industry publications. If you attempt to use those platforms to spread defamatory information about Mr. Al-Rashid, we'll add abuse of media ownership and defamation to your growing list of charges." The silence that followed was delicious. Grace could almost hear Pemberton recalculating his options on the other end of the line. Agent Winters seized the moment. "Mr. Pemberton, I'm also informing you that the FAA has grounded your flight. Your jet will not be cleared for takeoff. You have 2 options. Deplane voluntarily and surrender to federal agents waiting at Teterboro, or we'll board the aircraft and arrest you by force. Your choice." More silence. Then Pemberton's voice, stripped of its earlier confidence. "You can't ground a private flight without cause." "We have plenty of cause," Agent Winters replied. "Flight risk in an active federal investigation, witness intimidation, conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, money laundering. Shall I continue? Mr. Pemberton, your plane isn't leaving the ground today. The only question is whether you're going to make this easy or difficult." Grace heard muffled voices on Pemberton's end of the line, his pilot probably, or perhaps his attorney. Then Pemberton spoke again, and all the fight had gone out of his voice. "I want immunity, full immunity in exchange for my cooperation. I'll give you everything, the whole network. There are others involved, others you don't even know about yet." Khalid's eyes widened. "Others? Malcolm, how many people did you destroy?" "Enough," Pemberton said quietly. "And I wasn't always the architect, Khalid. Sometimes I was just the facilitator. There's a whole ecosystem of people who do what I do. CFOs for hire, handwriting experts who forge signatures, lawyers who specialize in asset stripping, journalists who plant negative stories. It's an industry, and I'm just one player in it." Agent Winters and Agent Reeves exchanged significant looks. This was bigger than they'd thought. Not just one man's revenge scheme, but a coordinated network of financial predators. "We'll discuss immunity with the U.S. Attorney," Agent Reeves said carefully. "But first, you need to deplane and surrender. Then we'll talk about what you know and what you're willing to share. And if I do this, if I cooperate fully, Khalid doesn't press charges for the threats against Mrs. Washington's family." Khalid's face hardened. "That's not up to me, Malcolm. That's a federal crime. But I'll tell you what I will do. If you cooperate, if you help bring down this entire network, I won't pursue additional civil damages beyond recovering what you stole from me. That's the best offer you're going to get." Grace could hear Pemberton breathing heavily, weighing his limited options. "Finally, I'm deplaning. Tell your agents not to shoot. They won't shoot if you cooperate," Agent Winters assured him. He nodded to Agent Reeves, who immediately left the room, presumably to coordinate with the agents at Teterboro Airport. The call ended. For a moment, everyone in the interview room just stared at each other, processing what had just happened. They'd gone from pursuing one man for one crime to potentially exposing an entire criminal enterprise. Jennifer Chen broke the silence. "Khalid, if Pemberton's telling the truth about this network, this case could take years to fully prosecute. You need to be prepared for that." Khalid nodded slowly. "What about my bankruptcy proceedings? Can they be permanently dismissed now?" "We'll argue that the entire basis for the bankruptcy was fraudulent," Jennifer replied. "With Pemberton in custody and cooperating, we can prove systematic fraud. The court will have to dismiss. But recovering your actual assets, that's going to be complicated. Some of those properties have been sold to third parties who may have purchased them in good faith. Unwinding all of those transactions will take time." "How much time?" Khalid asked. "Months, possibly years for complete resolution." Grace saw the exhaustion settle over Khalid's features. He'd been awake for more than 24 hours, had gone from signing bankruptcy papers to becoming a key witness in a federal investigation, and now faced the prospect of years of legal battles ahead. "Sir," Grace said gently, "you need to rest. You need to eat something real, not just coffee. You need to take care of yourself." Khalid smiled at her. A real smile this time, warm and grateful. "Always taking care of me, aren't you, Grace?" "Someone has to," she replied. "And now that you've made me your special consultant at $200,000 a year, I suppose it's my job to make sure you don't collapse from exhaustion." That broke the tension in the room. Even Agent Winters chuckled. But the moment of levity was interrupted by Agent Reeves returning, her expression grave. "We have a problem. Pemberton deplaned at Teterboro, but he collapsed on the tarmac. Possible heart attack. He's being rushed to Hackensack University Medical Center right now." "Is he going to survive?" Khalid asked urgently. "Unknown. But if he dies before he can give us the names of the other people in this network..." Agent Reeves didn't need to finish the sentence. Without Pemberton's cooperation, the investigation would hit a wall. Grace felt panic rising in her chest. "What about Thomas Hendricks? Can't he give you the same information?" "Hendricks is still in the wind," Agent Winters said grimly. "We've got alerts at every airport, train station, and border crossing. But he's been doing this for years. He knows how to disappear." "No," Grace said suddenly, her voice sharp with realization. "No, he doesn't." Everyone turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" Agent Winters asked. Grace stood, her mind racing through memories, small details she'd filed away over the years. Hendricks, or Halloran, or whatever his real name is, he had habits, routines. I noticed because I'm used to noticing patterns in people. Every Thursday morning he'd come into the office with a coffee from the same shop, a little place in Hoboken called Dante's. He'd make the same joke about their terrible Wi-Fi. And one time, I heard him on the phone arguing with someone about rent, something about a lease renewal coming up in July. Agent Winters was suddenly very attentive. "July? That's next month. Grace, did you hear an address?" Grace closed her eyes, reaching back into her memory. She'd been dusting Khalid's office, trying to be invisible as always. Hendricks had been pacing near the window, phone pressed to his ear, annoyed. "Something about Washington Street," he said. "Washington Street, 3rd floor, you know where I'm talking about." And then he laughed and said, "Yeah, right across from the bakery that always smells like heaven." Agent Winters was already typing on his tablet. Hoboken, Washington Street, near a bakery, 3rd floor apartment. That's maybe a dozen possibilities. He looked up at Agent Reeves. "Get me a team. We're going to Hoboken." "I want to come," Khalid said immediately. "Absolutely not," Agent Reeves replied. "This is an active federal operation. Civilians stay here." "Then I'm coming," Grace said, surprising herself as much as everyone else. "I've seen Hendricks up close hundreds of times. I know his mannerisms, his habits, the way he moves. If you're watching a building and someone leaves wearing a disguise, I'll be able to tell if it's him." Agent Winters considered this. "She has a point. Hendricks is a chameleon. He's used 6 different identities. Having someone who knows his physical tells could be valuable." "It's too dangerous," Khalid protested. "Grace, you've done enough. You don't need to put yourself at more risk." Grace turned to face him, and in that moment she wasn't his maid or even his consultant. She was a woman who'd spent 62 years being underestimated, who'd finally found her voice and wasn't about to be silenced now. "Mr. Al-Rashid, with all due respect, this isn't your choice. Hendricks threatened my grandson. He helped destroy your life. And if Malcolm Pemberton dies in that hospital without giving up the network, Hendricks is our only lead. I'm going to help catch him." Khalid opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He recognized something in Grace's expression, the same determination he'd felt when he'd first come to America with nothing but ambition and his father's pen, the same fire that had driven him to build an empire. Grace Washington had that fire now, and he knew better than to try to extinguish it. "Fine," he conceded, "but you wear a vest, and you stay in the surveillance van at all times, and if there's even a hint of danger, you get out. Agreed?" Grace nodded. "Agreed." Agent Winters checked his watch. "It's 11:30 now. We can have a team in Hoboken by 1 p.m. Let's move." As they prepared to leave, Jennifer Chen pulled Grace aside. "Are you sure about this? You don't have to prove anything to anyone." Grace smiled, a small, quiet smile that held decades of invisible work and unspoken thoughts. "Maybe I do, Miss Chen. Maybe I need to prove it to myself. I spent my whole life cleaning up other people's messes, being the person nobody sees. Just once I want to be the person who actually solves the problem, the person who matters." Jennifer Chen studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's go catch a criminal." 20 minutes later, Grace found herself in the back of an unmarked FBI van, watching Hoboken pass by through tinted windows. She was wearing a bulletproof vest that felt too heavy and too tight, holding a photograph of Thomas Hendricks that Agent Winters had given her, and wondering what her daughter would say if she could see her now. Probably something like, "Mama, what in God's name are you doing?" And Grace would reply, "What I should have done a long time ago," refusing to be invisible. The van pulled up 3 blocks from Washington Street. Agent Winters handed Grace a pair of binoculars and pointed to a 3-story building with a bakery on the ground floor. 3rd floor, corner apartment. "We've confirmed the lease is under the name Timothy Hall, probably short for Halloran. Now we wait and see if he shows up." Grace settled in for what she assumed would be a long surveillance operation. But 15 minutes later, she spotted a figure approaching the building. A man in his 50s wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, carrying a bag from a nearby grocery store. "That's him," Grace said immediately. "Third person from the left. Blue cap." "How can you tell?" Agent Winters asked. "His face is mostly covered." "The way he walks," Grace explained. "He has this slight hitch in his right step. I noticed it over the years. And see how he keeps his left hand in his pocket? That's his tell when he's nervous. He did it every time Mr. Al-Rashid questioned one of his reports." Agent Winters radioed his team. "Possible target approaching, stand by." Grace watched through the binoculars as Thomas Hendricks, Timothy Halloran, whatever his real name was, walked toward the building that he thought was his safe haven, completely unaware that the woman he'd never really noticed was about to bring his entire world crashing down. The afternoon sun beat down on Washington Street in Hoboken as Thomas Hendricks approached his apartment building, completely oblivious to the FBI surveillance team positioned around him. Grace watched through the binoculars, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was the man who'd helped orchestrate Khalid's destruction, who'd fabricated documents and drained accounts, who'd threatened her grandson, and now, finally, justice was closing in. "All units, target confirmed entering the building," Agent Winters spoke into his radio. "Move in on my signal, remember we need him alive and talking." Grace watched as Hendricks pulled out his keys and unlocked the entrance door. He glanced around once, a nervous, furtive look, before disappearing inside. Within seconds, FBI agents emerged from unmarked vehicles and strategically positioned themselves around the building's exits. "Grace, stay in the van no matter what happens," Agent Winters instructed as he prepared to join his team. "If something goes wrong, I know, I stay here and keep the doors locked." Grace managed a small smile. "I've come this far. I'm not going to do anything stupid now." Agent Winters nodded and exited the van, leaving Grace alone with one other agent, a young woman named Santos who couldn't have been more than 25. They sat in tense silence, listening to the radio chatter as the tactical team made their way up to the 3rd floor. "FBI, open the door." The command echoed through the radio, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Grace held her breath, waiting for gunshots or screams or any sign that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Instead, she heard Agent Winters' calm voice. "Suspect in custody, no resistance, repeat, suspect secured without incident." Grace exhaled, feeling tension drain from her shoulders. Agent Santos grinned at her. That's how we like them. Boring and cooperative. 20 minutes later, Grace watched as agents led Thomas Hendricks out of the building in handcuffs. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his expensive suits and confident demeanor. His eyes scanned the street nervously until they landed on the surveillance van, and somehow, impossibly, locked directly onto Grace through the tinted window. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by shock, then resignation. He'd been brought down by the Maid, the woman he'd never bothered to really see in 7 years of working alongside her. The irony wasn't lost on him, and Grace saw him shake his head with something that might have been bitter admiration before agents pushed him into a waiting vehicle. "You did good work today," Agent Santos said. "Without your identification and that detail about his walk, we might have missed him." Grace nodded, but her mind was already moving forward. Hendricks was in custody, but Malcolm Pemberton was fighting for his life in a hospital. The network he'd mentioned, the ecosystem of financial predators, remained largely untouched. This wasn't over yet. Her phone buzzed. A text from Khalid. "Hendricks arrested, you're amazing. Come back to the office when you're ready. We have much to discuss." 2 days later, Grace found herself in a very different setting, the executive conference room of Al-Rashid Enterprises, which until recently had been empty and scheduled for liquidation. Now it was filled with lawyers, FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Malcolm Pemberton had survived his heart attack and was singing like a canary from his hospital bed, providing names, dates, account numbers, and evidence of a fraud network that stretched across 3 continents. Grace sat beside Khalid, still adjusting to her new role. She was no longer wearing her maid's uniform, but a professional outfit that Jennifer Chen had helped her select. It felt strange, surreal even, to be sitting at this table as an equal, rather than serving coffee from the sidelines. Thanks to Mr. Pemberton's cooperation, the lead prosecutor announced, we've identified 17 individuals involved in systematic financial fraud targeting high-net-worth individuals and corporations. We've frozen assets worth approximately $2 billion across multiple jurisdictions. Mr. Al-Rashid, I'm pleased to inform you that we've been able to trace and recover approximately $8 billion of your assets. The remainder was dissipated through various channels, but we're continuing to pursue recovery. Khalid closed his eyes briefly. Not a complete recovery, but enough to rebuild. More than enough, actually, considering that 2 days ago he'd been about to sign bankruptcy papers. What about the others? Khalid asked. The men Pemberton destroyed before me? The prosecutor's expression grew somber. We're reaching out to all potential victims. Some cases are too old to prosecute, but we're exploring civil remedies. The Chen family has already filed claims. The Rodriguez estate is being contacted, and Mr. O'Connor has expressed interest in participating in the recovery process. And Robert Yamamoto? Khalid's voice was quiet. The one who committed suicide? His widow is being notified. Any recovered assets attributable to her husband's case will be returned to his estate. The prosecutor paused. Mr. Al-Rashid, none of this would have been possible without your willingness to fight back. Most of Pemberton's previous victims were too devastated or too ashamed to challenge him. You gave us the opening we needed. It wasn't me, Khalid said firmly, turning to Grace. It was Grace Washington. She noticed what everyone else missed. She had the courage to speak up when it would have been easier to stay silent. She's the hero of this story, not me. Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks as everyone in the room turned to look at her. I just paid attention, she said quietly. That's all. That's everything, Agent Winters corrected. Most people look but don't see, Mrs. Washington. You saw, and you acted. That's the definition of courage. Jennifer Chen stood, a thick folder in her hands. Which brings us to the next order of business. Grace, Mr. Al-Rashid has asked me to prepare these documents for you. She slid the folder across the table. This is a formal employment contract establishing you as Special Consultant and Director of Internal Oversight for Al-Rashid Enterprises. Salary of $250,000 annually, full benefits, and a one-time bonus of $500,000 for your role in recovering the company's assets. Grace stared at the folder as if it might explode. I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not nearly enough, Khalid said. Grace, you saved my company, my reputation, and probably my life. You've earned every penny. And more importantly, I need someone like you. Someone who pays attention to details, someone who isn't afraid to speak truth to power. Someone I can trust absolutely. Will you accept? Grace thought about her tiny apartment in Queens, about decades of cleaning offices and serving coffee, about being invisible and voiceless. She thought about her grandson Terrence at Columbia, about her daughter who'd struggled as a single mother, about all the dreams she'd deferred because survival had to come first. And then she thought about the last 48 hours, about standing up to federal agents and billionaires alike, about tracking down a criminal, about finally being seen and heard and valued. I accept, she said, her voice growing stronger. On one condition. Khalid raised an eyebrow. Name it. I want to establish a foundation, something that helps women like me. Women who work in service positions, who are invisible to the powerful people around them, who have intelligence and insights, but no platform to share them. I want to give them opportunities, training, education. I want them to know they matter. Khalid smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile Grace had seen from him in months. Consider it done. The Grace Washington Foundation for Service Workers. We'll fund it with $5 million to start. Grace felt tears prickling her eyes. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Grace, for everything. 3 months later, Grace stood in the lobby of Al-Rashid Enterprises' newly reopened headquarters in Manhattan. The bankruptcy proceedings had been permanently dismissed. Malcolm Pemberton was awaiting trial in federal detention, his empire dismantled and his co-conspirators being rounded up one by one. Thomas Hendricks had pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and was cooperating with authorities. facing a 15-year sentence. Khalid's business was rebuilding slowly, but steadily. Some assets were lost forever, some partnerships had dissolved, but the core of his empire remained intact. And with Grace's help, he was implementing new oversight procedures to ensure that what happened with Hendricks could never happen again. Grace's daughter Maya and grandson Terrence stood beside her, staring up at the building with expressions of awe and pride. "Mama, I still can't believe this is real," Maya said, squeezing Grace's hand. "My mother, the consultant, the director, the woman who brought down a billionaire criminal. I'm still the same person," Grace protested. "I just finally got noticed." Terrence grinned at her. "Grandma, you're a legend. They're talking about making a documentary about this whole case, and you're like the hero." Grace laughed. "I don't know about hero. I just did what needed to be done." But as she looked up at the gleaming building, at the name Al-Rashid Enterprises emblazoned across its facade, she felt something she'd never quite experienced before. Pride. Not just in what she'd accomplished, but in who she'd become. For 62 years, she'd been invisible. Now finally, she was seen. Her phone buzzed. A text from Khalid. "Board meeting in 20 minutes. Your input on the new CFO candidates is crucial. Don't be late." Grace smiled. "Come on," she said to Maya and Terrence. "I have a meeting to get to. Want to see my office?" As they rode the elevator to the 47th floor, Grace Washington, former Maid, current director of internal oversight, and the woman who'd saved a $4.2 billion empire by noticing a date discrepancy, reflected on how much her life had changed in just 3 months. She'd learned that sometimes the smallest details matter most. That courage isn't about being fearless, it's about acting despite fear. That invisibility is a choice other people make, not a condition you have to accept. And most importantly, that it's never too late to stop being invisible and start demanding to be seen. The elevator doors opened onto a floor of gleaming offices and purposeful activity. Grace stepped out confidently, her daughter and grandson following behind, ready to face whatever challenges came next. Because Grace Washington had discovered something powerful. Once you've saved an empire, once you've brought down criminals, once you've proven your worth to yourself and the world, there's no going back to being invisible. And she wouldn't have it any other way. 6 months after Malcolm Pemberton's arrest, Grace Washington stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, looking out at 200 faces. Cleaning staff, housekeepers, maintenance workers, administrative assistants, and service employees from across New York City. These were her people, the invisible workforce that kept the city running, and today was the official launch of the Grace Washington Foundation for Service Workers. "I spent 40 years being invisible," Grace began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I cleaned offices where billion-dollar deals were made and nobody asked my opinion. I served coffee during meetings where lives were changed and nobody wondered what I thought. I organized files that contained secrets worth millions, and nobody imagined I was paying attention." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But I was paying attention. I was always paying attention. And when the moment came, when I saw something that everyone else had missed, I had a choice. I could stay silent and invisible, or I could speak up and be seen. I chose to be seen, and that choice changed everything." The audience applauded, and Grace saw tears in many eyes. These people understood what she meant because they'd lived it themselves. The experience of being essential yet overlooked, valuable yet undervalued. Khalid sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Beside him were Jennifer Chen, Agent Winters, and representatives from 3 other companies whose executives had fallen victim to Pemberton's network. The FBI's investigation had expanded globally, uncovering fraud schemes in London, Hong Kong, Dubai, and Singapore. 17 arrests so far, with more expected. "This foundation exists to make sure that what happened to me can happen to all of you," Grace continued. "Not the criminal investigation part," she paused for laughter, "but the being seen part, the being valued part, the having opportunities part. We're offering scholarships for job training and education. We're providing legal assistance for workplace issues. We're creating mentorship programs that connect service workers with professionals in fields they want to enter. And we're establishing a hotline for reporting financial irregularities, because you see things that others miss, and that vision is valuable." After the presentation, as guests mingled over refreshments, a young Latina woman approached Grace nervously. She couldn't have been more than 25, wearing a housekeeping uniform from one of Manhattan's luxury hotels. "Mrs. Washington? My name is Sophia Reyes. I think I might be seeing something at my job. Something like what you saw." But I'm scared to say anything because you're afraid you'll lose your job, Grace finished gently. Because you think nobody will believe you. Because you've spent your whole life being told that your observations don't matter. Sophia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Grace took her hand. Come with me. Let's talk somewhere private. And then we're going to contact the Foundation's legal team. Because your observations do matter, Sophia. They matter very much. As Grace led Sophia toward a quiet corner, Khalid watched with satisfaction. He'd rebuilt his empire, recovered most of his assets, and implemented new security measures. But his greatest achievement, he believed, wasn't any of that. It was recognizing Grace's worth and giving her the platform to help others like herself. Malcolm Pemberton's trial was scheduled for next spring. Thomas Hendricks had been sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The other members of the fraud network were falling like dominoes as prosecutors built their cases. The financial world had been shaken by the revelations, and new regulations were being proposed to prevent similar schemes. But the real change, Khalid thought as he watched Grace counsel Sophia with the same attentive care she'd once shown him, wasn't happening in boardrooms or courtrooms. It was happening right here, in conversations like this one, where invisible people were learning to make themselves seen. Later that evening, Grace returned to her apartment in Queens, the same small place she'd lived in for 23 years. She could afford something much nicer now, something in Manhattan with a doorman and a view, but she wasn't ready to leave yet. This was home, where her daughter had grown up, where she'd raised her grandchildren on weekends, where her church community and neighbors knew her not as Director Washington or Foundation President, but simply as Grace. Her daughter Maya was waiting for her, having let herself in with the spare key. "Mama, I watched your speech online. You were incredible." Grace kicked off her heels, still not used to wearing them all day, and sank onto her familiar, comfortable couch. "I was terrified the entire time." "You didn't look terrified. You looked powerful." Maya sat beside her mother, taking her hand. "Mama, do you ever regret it? Taking this path? Your life was simpler before." Grace considered the question seriously. Her life had become complicated in ways she'd never imagined. She received speaking invitations, interview requests, even a book deal offer. She attended high-level business meetings and consulted on corporate security matters. She'd testified before a Senate committee on financial oversight. She had responsibilities and pressures she'd never experienced as a maid, but she also had a voice. She had influence. She had the ability to change lives, not just clean offices. "No," Grace said finally, "I don't regret it. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing what I was meant to do. All those years of paying attention, of noticing details, of seeing what others missed, it wasn't wasted. It was preparation for this." Maya hugged her mother tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Mama. And Daddy would be proud too." Grace's husband had died 8 years ago, before any of this had happened. She wished he could see her now, could see how far she'd come, but somehow she thought he knew. He'd always believed she was capable of more, had always encouraged her to speak up, to share her observations. He would have loved seeing her on that podium today. Her phone buzzed, a text from Khalid. "Thank you for today, you inspire me. You inspire everyone. See you Monday for the quarterly review. Your insights on the new financial controls are essential." Grace smiled and typed back, "See you Monday. And Khalid, thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked right through me. You changed my life." His response came quickly. "No, Grace, you changed mine. And then you changed your own. That's what heroes do." Grace set down her phone and looked around her modest apartment, at the photos of her family on the walls, at the worn but beloved furniture, at the life she'd built through decades of hard work and quiet dignity. She was still Grace Washington from Queens, still the woman who'd raised 3 children on a housekeeper's salary, still the grandmother who made the best sweet potato pie in the neighborhood. But she was also something more now. She was proof that invisible people could become visible, that quiet voices could become powerful, that paying attention mattered, and that it was never too late to demand to be seen. And that, Grace thought as she finally relaxed into her evening, was a legacy worth building. If you were in her place, would you have spoken up or stayed silent? Subscribe for more stories that prove that sometimes the smallest eyes see the biggest truths.